And we're really fortunate. We have 4 excellent speakers, real experts in their area, following up on this theme of what we can do to restore the climate. So we're going to get right into it. We're going to have roughly an hour, and then we have a half hour for discussions. For those of you who came in late, Elise introduced me. I'm Tom McCone. I'm going to be moderating this part of the program, and I want to get right into it by introducing our first speaker. Dr. Erica Dodds. She is the Chief Operating Officer of the Foundation for Climate Restoration. She holds a PhD in Interdisciplinary Evaluation and an MA in International Development Administration. Her lifelong interest in poverty reduction led her to study abroad in West Africa, intern with an NGO in rural India, and worked for the Evaluation Office of the International Labor Organization in Geneva. But now she's working on climate restoration, and she's going to tell us about some of the work that's going on in that area. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you. How do we get this to project?
Do you want to start with the video?
No.
Let's start with the video. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll start with a brief video that's just on this topic, and then Erica will read it.
For the whole of human history, Earth's atmosphere has never had more than 300 parts per million of carbon dioxide. We've now exceeded 415 parts per million, rising every year. The Paris goal set a cap at 450 parts per million. But humans have never lived long-term in this kind of climate. The truth is, we don't even know if we can survive in such a climate. What if we can actually reverse climate change? We can restore a healthy climate. We can reduce atmospheric CO2 levels to less than 300 parts per million. A pre-industrial climate that lets life on Earth thrive. We at the Foundation for Climate Restoration, together with citizens, scientists, faith leaders, policymakers, corporations, and more, are committing to restoring a healthy climate by 2050. A decade of climate restoration will be the first step to bring this vision to reality. Together, members of the Global Coalition for Climate Restoration will shift our climate trajectory. We can and must give our youth and future generations a planet that is safe and healthy, beautiful and abundant. It's time to restore our climate.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for coming. I think Elise did a fantastic job introducing this event tonight, and I completely overprogrammed my presentation, so I'm going to probably talk a little bit fast because I know that this is a pretty high-level audience, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on the high-level stuff. I want to really dig down as much as I can. So, I love talking to people about climate restoration because, as Elise said, people feel so hopeless. And it's amazing just seeing the look of relief on people's faces and, seeing the load lifted off their shoulders when they realize that, as much as we hear that this is a huge intractable problem, there are still things we can do. It's not impossible. And we have a real opportunity here to innovate. So I hope that all of you leave tonight feeling really excited and looking forward to talking to people you know about this stuff. I find it really exciting. I'm going to talk pretty high level, like I mentioned. There's a lot more in our white paper that we published last September. You can find it on our website at f4cr.org/whitepaper. Or you can come talk to me, and I'll give you that URL again later. I'm going to skip through a bunch of this, I think, because a lot of it's been covered already. But I'm going to say climate restoration is really complementary to mitigation and adaptation. So for as long as we've been talking about the climate, basically we've been talking about reducing emissions and adapting to the changes that we've already built into our system. And there's no question that those are absolutely critical things to do. But now that we have all this excess CO2 in our atmosphere and it stays there for 1,000 years, it's not going to be enough anymore to stop adding to it. We need to pull out the excess that's already there. I forgot to do this at the beginning. Would you raise your hand if you've heard of climate restoration before this event? Okay, I would say that's like 4/5 of the room. Last time I was here in April, I think it was about 2/3. That's very exciting. So our goal at the Foundation for Climate Restoration, and the climate restoration goal in general, is to restore a safe and healthy climate by the year 2050. And we define that as having CO2 levels under 300 parts per million, because that's what humans evolved in. That's what it was up until the industrial era. So we know that that works for us and for our natural world. And as Leslie Field mentioned, we also need to restore the Arctic, not just because of the warming effects that she mentioned, but also because keeping the Arctic frozen keeps permafrost in the ground, or keeps methane under the permafrost. So it's critical that we keep it there because methane is 80 times as potent as CO2. Its lifespan is much shorter, but that's just an incredible boost to our heating in the meantime if we let that escape. People like to ask whether climate restoration is possible. That's usually the first question we get. And as a case example, we can talk about Climeworks. You might have heard of them. They're a Swiss company, and they have a huge direct air capture plant. And they take the carbon dioxide that they capture, and they pump it underground in Iceland into basalt fields. And underground, it mineralizes into rock. Rock is the most stable form of CO2, so it'll just stay there pretty much indefinitely, which is great. Except someone has to pay for it. And there are a lot of great schemes to, buy carbon offsets and pay for these things, but will it be enough to get to the trillion tons of CO2 that we need to remove, or scale to 50 billion tons per year? Maybe. That's definitely possible. On the logistical side, there's no reason why we couldn't expand this kind of production to meet the needs that we have, other than money. So in terms of it being possible, yes, it is physically possible to do it. But like I said, it's not ideal. So we have 3 criteria that we use at the Foundation for Climate Restoration to determine what is the best kind of climate restoration solution. Now, we don't expect everything to meet all 3 criteria, but it's a really nice benchmark to sort of evaluate the solutions that we come across. So the first is permanence. So I mentioned Climeworks. They pump the carbon underground. It mineralizes into rock. It's going to stay there for at least a century. We want things that will stay there for at least a century. There are a lot of awesome things that people are doing with carbon dioxide, like putting it into carbonated beverages, which is, it's cool. It recycles the carbon dioxide, so at least you're not, creating more. But ultimately, in terms of reducing our atmospheric load of CO2, that's not going to contribute. So in terms of a climate restoration solution, permanence is critical. The second piece is scalability. Okay, so I mentioned that one could theoretically expand the Climeworks solution to meet all of the 50 billion tons per year of CO2 that we need to remove. It would be really hard. So ideally, we want things that already have a gigantic market. So if everyone in the world was already, buying carbon offsets for everything in their lives, then the Climeworks thing might actually be scalable. Right now, it's pretty iffy. So we want to find things that have such big markets that scalability is not a huge concern, and they can get to at least 25 gigatons per year. Finally, financeability. So this is the big problem that I mentioned with Climeworks. It may be financeable, but it's certainly not financeable today. And we really want things that are financeable today because we don't have a whole lot of time to get things going, as we know. So there are things that are commercially viable, which I'll be talking a little bit more about. But I really would love for you each to just take these 3 criteria, permanent, scalable, financeable. And when you come across a new exciting solution, just ask yourself, how does it do on these 3 criteria? Finally, people ask us about safety a lot. I know there's a lot of concern about, the scale of work that we need to do. There is a potential for unintended risks and consequences, and we definitely need to do a lot of research and pilot testing to make sure that things that we're doing are going to be effective and benign. And at the same time, the way that we've historically thought about safety is how does doing this compare to what we have today? And that's not a good measure anymore, because if we do nothing, we don't stay with what we have today. We get much, much worse. So now we need to be thinking, okay, what are the anticipated risks and consequences of this thing? Versus what are things going to look like in 20 years if we fail to act? I'm going to skip these and come back to them potentially. I want to get to, we've had a really exciting start to our year at the Foundation for Climate Restoration. I want to be sure to touch on it, and I'll weave some solutions in here really quickly as well. So we see that for climate restoration to succeed, it needs to have an ecosystem that supports it. So that means that it's not enough to dump money in, because a lot of these solutions are really in startup mode. They need a lot of support from the policy side, from the finance side, from the just thinking bigger and thinking about what would it actually take for my business to restore the climate, which, ordinary people tend not to ask themselves. So we see ourselves as the literal foundation upon which a lot of different initiatives can stand. So we provide the education, communications, advocacy, convenings, partnership building, all of these things that really support initiatives that we're working on, like building a coalition of partners all over the world that can contribute to climate restoration, like building a solutions exchange that really provides a pipeline to get potential solutions to market, and a governance institution that provides coordination, collaboration, supportive regulation to allow climate restoration solutions to take off. So when we're thinking about this, we really see three key areas where our foundation needs to provide leverage, and those are solutions. So finding solutions that can actually restore the climate, movement, so demonstrating the public demand for climate restoration, and governance, providing a supportive policy environment that will allow these things to work. I also have handouts on this if you see me after at the table. Okay, so I'm going to walk really quickly through the work that we've done so far in each of these areas. So on the solution side, I had some slides about Blue Planet and ocean ecosystem restoration. We have been, researching and identifying solutions over the last few years that we've been working on this and trying to bring visibility and support to those solutions. So there are approaches out there like mineralizing that CO2, just like Climeworks does underground, except you can actually do it in a lab, and then you have rock that you can sell. And because rock is a main component of concrete and building materials, the demand for it globally is over 50 billion tons per year, and it's doubling every 12 years. So in terms of having a market, having a commercial product, this is a really great approach. And Blue Planet, the company that's doing this, just announced a really exciting partnership with K-Mine Development Corporation, and they're going to help them scale globally over the next few years. So we're really excited to see that progress with them. Over the last few years with all this research, we have gotten a lot of questions about, where can I learn more and dig in? As I mentioned, we have that white paper that we published in the fall. Again, the URL is f4cr.org/whitepaper. And now we're working on the next big thing. We see a need to identify all these solutions, provide them with some coaching, a lot of them have great ideas. They have an idea of who their investors might be, but they really don't know how to build a pitch. Or they have a great solution, but they haven't even thought about what it would take to get to 25 gigatons per year, even if we think they're really well suited. So we're trying to kind of push people along, raise the bar, and connect them with investors who want to invest. So we're working on building the Solutions Exchange this year. We just saw that amazing video by Alan Savory about desertification. And Elise mentioned there are a lot of really exciting natural land-based approaches to carbon sequestration. We're working on a partnership with NASA CMS. That's their carbon monitoring system. And they have satellite imaging technology that can look at carbon fluxes and flows all over the world. And so we're working with them to look at, monitoring and evaluating land-based climate restoration solutions so that we can get better data about exactly what works in real time. And we are always looking for partnerships with new and emerging solutions. If you know of one that I might not have heard of, please come talk to me. I would love to know what there is out there. So building up to this point in time, it's been really clear that if people aren't talking about climate restoration around the world at the highest levels, at the lowest levels, then nothing is going to move. So we've spent a lot of our efforts showing up at convenings, hosting our own convenings, talking to anyone who will listen, doing radio interviews, all of the stuff that we can figure out to get the word out there. And we have a lot more of that coming. So we have been so lucky to form this partnership with Earth Day Network. They're the conveners of our Global Earth Day, and they're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Earth Day this spring. And they've made climate restoration one of the themes of that celebration and invited us to speak at their celebration on the National Mall in D.C. So we're thrilled. We're also hosting our second annual Global Climate Restoration Forum at the United Nations this September. It's open to the public. Mark your calendars. We'd love to have you there. We have great connections in the Vatican, and with faith leaders from all different faiths worldwide, we're working on forming a coalition of faith leaders who can speak to the moral imperative of restoring the climate for future generations. So we're launching a Faith Leaders Coalition this year as well. Again, always looking for new partnerships. If your organization wants to work more closely with us on climate restoration, come talk to me. And because we've seen so much momentum from young people in the last few years, we are launching our own youth training program. So we want to see young people learn about climate restoration, be trained how to speak about it, and how to train others to speak about it. We would love to see climate restoration messaging find its way into all of the existing powerful organizations that are out there, because most young people have no idea that this is even an option. Oh, and we're working on this with the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, which is fantastic. They have great resources and amazing staff. Okay, finally, this is probably the most exciting one so far. So we've been working with policymakers for a long time. Our founder actually came out of CCL, so he has a lot of experience talking to policymakers about anything that he finds important, which is fantastic. And we held a briefing for policymakers last April in D.C., standing room only. It was really well received. We're planning to do 2 more of those this year. And we've seen resolutions come from Santa Clara County, the U.S. Congress from Representative Raskin, and the Senate from Senators AOC and Bernie Sanders. And thanks to an organization called Schools for Climate Action, there are, I don't even know how many, I think over 40 resolutions from school districts nationwide that use climate restoration messaging in the resolutions. So we see this as a great opportunity for policymakers to frame their work within their commitment to restoring the climate. But now that that's gained so much momentum, we will continue it forward, but it's time to step things up. So today, our team at the World Economic Forum in Davos held a dinner co-hosted by the Thunderbird School of Global Management. Standing room only. They actually got over 90 RSVPs for 50 seats. Don't quote me on this, but I think I heard the president of Kenya on the Facebook Live video saying that Kenya was joining our task force to call for a global institution for climate restoration governance. So today has been a really exciting day. I'm glad I get to share it with all of you. So we're working through that event, and with the task force that was formed today, we're working towards the launch of this global institution. So that'll involve about a year's worth of convenings and discussions to design what does this institution need to look like in order to coordinate supportive regulations that will ensure safety and at-scale deployment of these solutions within a time frame that we can tolerate as humans. So we have a lot of work to do. In the next year, we want to declare a decade of climate restoration in time for our second annual Climate Restoration Forum at the UN. That will lead into our decade of climate restoration, during which all of these solutions that I've mentioned that meet our criteria and can restore the climate scale up to restoration scale, so that collectively they're removing 50 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year permanently. And then they can operate at that scale for the next 20 years until 2050, and then we'll have done it, just like that. So thank you to our amazing partners. I would love to talk to any of you afterwards at the tabling area and answer any questions you have. Thank you so much.
I think you can stay there until we start the discussion. Right. So thank you very much. And for those of you who have questions, I want to remind you we're going to hold questions for all of the speakers until after they've all had a chance to talk. So we're going to move right on to our next speaker, Ellie Cohen, who is CEO of the Climate Center. She's a leader in catalyzing cross-boundary collaborative and just solutions to climate change and environmental degradation. An honors graduate of Duke University in botany and Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, she was named one of the 100 women taking the lead to save our planet in the U.S. by the National Women's History Project. Most recently, Ellie has served as president and CEO of Point Blue Conservation Science.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We're going to start with a quick video here.
Oh.
So you know the name of the organization that Anne Hancock runs?
It's the Center for
the
Climate Protection Campaign. That's what it used to be called, right?
It's the Center for Climate Stuff?
No, a climate center. No, that isn't right. Clean Air Center. No.
The Center for Climate Action. No.
I think it's the Global Redwood Forest Protection Agency.
the Climate Situation Center.
Climate Appreciation?
Community Action Climate Center Protection Agency. I'm stumped right now. I don't actually know what it's called.
It's the Center for Climate Protection. It's not the Climate Control Center. We can't just push a button and make global climate change not a thing. It's the Center for Climate Protection. We want to protect our climate. Why? Well, we've got all this gas. Not that gas. Greenhouse gas. Way too much greenhouse gas. Which is making our climate go from this to this. And as it turns out, a lot of stuff we like depends on our climate. Like our grandchildren and their grandchildren and all future babies. Center for Climate Protection. How do we protect the climate? We reduce greenhouse gas emissions at speed and scale. That means reductions that are big and fast.
We tell greenhouse gases.
The Center for Climate Protection.
Did you know that nearly 4 out of 5 trips in Sonoma County are made by single-occupant, fossil fuel-powered smog machines?
Center for Climate Protection. People ask us all the time, what does it feel like to be heroes? We just smile and say, feels dope. Center for Climate Protection! Some people think we're too passionate about climate protection. Is that true? I don't know. To reduce methane emissions, did we invent bags to collect cow farts? Maybe. If we could ride around on magical carbon-eating rainbow Pegasi like majestic environmental wizards, would we? Yes. And we'd use sustainability sparkles to turn everyone's cars into hybrid vehicles powered by solar, electric, wind, and farmers markets. But until that happens, we'll keep protecting our climate non-magically by working with business, government, youth, and the broader community to advance practical, science-based solutions for significant greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So instead of this, we say like this. The Center for Climate Protection.
So I just started in September as a CEO of the Center for Climate Protection, and the board that hired me said, what do you think of our name? And I said, it's hard to remember. And so they said, change the name in the first week, and it is now just called the Climate Center. So what's our name? There you go. We should video this. We can add it at the end of this. But it's a funny video. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. We're really pleased to be with everyone. And thank you for everything you all do through the Citizens Climate Lobby and all the other groups that are represented here. Get right into this. Here's what's been happening in Australia, as you know. Guess we can turn the lights down a little bit. Or can you see it okay? Yeah. Okay. All right, great. So these are a new kind of cloud that we know about from California, pyrocumulus clouds that actually create dry lightning and actually create fire in other places. This is one of the many positive feedback loops in climate change that are very negative for us. And while I'm excited about what's possible for 2050, we're really focused on what we need to do in the next 5 years. And part of the reason that we at the Climate Center are focused on that is because of the latest science. We are pushing against 9 of 15 tipping points globally. That if we, in the next 5 to 10 years, really push that button all the way, we essentially establish the climate of the next 10,000 years that will be very inhospitable to life as we know it today. And I won't go into detail about this, but it's really important to understand that what's happening is connected to everything else. I remember hearing about the Gaia theory as a kid. It's really true. The Earth is one huge living entity, and everything is connected to everything else. And these lines here are just showing how, for example, in the Atlantic current, that as we get more fresh water pouring into it from Greenland and from melting permafrost, that it's changing the current today. This wasn't expected to happen for another 10 or 20 years, and it's happening already right now. That current is slowing. The warm water that comes around and actually warms and moderates weather in Europe is changing. It affects the rainforest in the Amazon as well and drives it to become drier, which then allows fires to occur more often. Everything is connected. In 2018, you all heard about the 1.5C report. One of our funders recently said to me, shouldn't we remind people what that really is? 1.5C is almost 3 degrees Fahrenheit. For the human body, if we had a temperature of 3 degrees, we'd be very close to being hospitalized. And we are so close to that right now as an Earth. And the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change asked that its scientists from all over the world assess what's the difference between 1.5 degrees Celsius warming and 2 degrees Celsius, or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And what did they conclude? As we all know, that emissions have to decline essentially in half by 2030 to stay within this limit of 1.5 to avoid going to the emergency room. And we have to remove, as we heard, up to 1 trillion, or 1,000 gigatons, or 1 trillion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent from the atmosphere over the decades ahead to ensure any kind of safe climate for us. Another study came out last year. As I should say, the UN looks at maybe a dozen pathways. Another study came out last year and said with computer technology today, we can look at a lot more pathways. We can actually look at 5 million climate pathways, all kinds of future scenarios. And that's what they did. Their conclusion was there are only a handful within that 5 million that actually lead to any kind of safe climate. And they strongly said we have to aggressively and immediately pursue carbon neutral energy production by 2030 and have a little bit of hope, a little bit of luck, actually, for a tolerable climate future, because we don't know how sensitive the climate system is to additional amounts of CO2. This is what we need to get to. So, the question is then, is the goal that we've been hearing about all around the world of getting to carbon neutrality, and that we heard about at the climate summit in Spain in December, and at the European Union and the state of California, getting to carbon neutrality, balancing emissions with carbon removal, is that enough based on what I just told you? No, not at all. What we have to get to is net negative emissions. And before I came today, I did one more search on the internet just to see, is there any country in the world that has actually set a goal by when they will achieve net negative emissions consistently? And I couldn't find one. We have a ways to go here to get back to a safe climate. And we can look at technology. We can look at all kinds of innovative new things that are happening. But per the science and the climate reality that we're experiencing, if we don't do something pretty significant in the next few years, we're setting ourselves on this other trajectory. We can always make a difference. I was born with a happy gene, and so I am optimistic. However, the more we do now, the better it is for all of us. So real quickly, there are countries and other governments that are doing some great things. In Finland, they're committed to carbon neutrality by 2035 without a carbon offset program. In Uruguay, they are committed to it by 2030 with big investments in wind and increased forest cover. Uh-oh. Did I just turn it off? There you go. In Norway, which is one of the biggest exporters of oil, I want to be very clear about that, but they have 60% of new car sales are electric, and they're banning the internal combustion engine car entirely in 2025. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's fantastic. Denmark has recently committed to 70% below 1990 levels of greenhouse gases by 2030. Copenhagen is committing to carbon neutrality by 2025 with economic growth. Rhode Island just announced the other day that they're committed to 100% renewable energy by 2030. Santa Monica, that great city in the South, is committed to 80% below 1990 levels of carbon emissions by 2030, converting half of their ICE vehicle car trips to walking or micro mobility by 2030. And water self-sufficiency by 2023 and zero waste by 2030. There are some really cool things that elected leaders are doing around the world. What are we doing in California? Well, at this moment in time, officially, we're only committed to 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. Is it enough? No. And we're only committed to 60% renewable energy by 2030. Is it enough? No. And we're only committed, only by executive order even, to carbon neutrality by 2045. Is it enough? No, not at all. And so what we need to do is, what we've decided anyway at the Climate Center, is that we want to focus on California. There are some challenges in Washington. The Citizens Climate Lobby is doing fantastic. But we know if we want to get some changes soon, we can focus right here in our own backyards with the 5th largest economy in the world, because what we do here does make a difference around the world. It can influence other states. It can influence other countries. It can influence the future of life on this planet. So we have decided to launch a Climate Safe California campaign for rapid decarbonization. And recently, I've seen rapid decarbonization used in context of carbon neutrality by 2050. I do not consider decadal efforts rapid. So we are calling this Climate Safe California, and for us, rapid means that we get a suite of policies enacted in California by 2025 that put us on track for a safe climate by 2030, so that we can actually be around to try some of the things that we just heard about and secure a healthy, vibrant, equitable future for all. A part of this has to be that we work with the labor community, with workers and their families. We have to support the transition from fossil fuels. The biggest challenge we have in Sacramento today is what? Anybody know? Actually, the labor unions who work for oil, gas, and PG&E. And I think they believe in climate change. They know it's real. They see the writing on the wall. But they have really great paid jobs, and they have health care for their families. And who's going to give that up unless there's a clear pathway for them to secure their own family well-being? And, of course, we have to keep prioritizing low-income communities. So our overarching goal, I'll go through these really quickly. Our overarching goal is that California commits quickly to accelerated decarbonization, 80% below 1990 levels by 2030, carbon neutrality by 2030, net negative emissions by 2035, and we believe we can do it with the political will, which means that we aren't targeting people who disagree. We need just a small percentage of the population. Studies have shown 3.5% of the population can make huge social change. That means we're targeting you. We all need to work together. It's the climate activists and climate advocates from all sectors of society that need to demand of our elected officials, our most progressive ones, that they must stand up for this, and we can't let oil and gas and the utilities, the investor-owned utilities, to stop us from doing what must be done based on the science. So first, we want 100% clean power. I won't go through all these right now, but you can read it quickly, and we have handouts at our table out there. Sustainable mobility, phasing out fossil fuel powered vehicles starting no later than 2025, switching the ratio of Caltrans money from building more freeways to investing in sustainable mobility. Healthy lands and waters, a lot of what we've already heard about today, and my own background in nature-based solutions at Point Blue here in California, we can sequester at least 100 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent annually by focusing on healthy soils and vegetation right here in our state, restoring habitat from the mountains like montane meadows to riparian habitat to coastal wetlands. And by putting that all together, I think we can do much more than that. Today's emissions in California are around 430 million metric tons. If we can reduce dramatically some of these emissions with technology and know-how that we have today and invest in these healthy soils and vegetation initiatives, we can reach carbon neutrality by 2030. And climate-safe communities, implementing clean energy community microgrids with electric vehicle storage so we get multiple benefits, starting with critical facilities in low-income communities and funding resilience in all communities. And, of course, we need to finance all this. And we're going to hear more about this, but one idea we have is a frequent flyer fee. If we charge just $5 to $10 per person, per passenger, we could raise $1 billion a year just from that. But we're going to need a lot more than what Governor Newsom just released. We're going to need $12 billion a year, not $12 billion over 5 years, but the political will needs to be there. So to wrap up, This is the kind of future we're looking for, climate-safe California that's clean, healthy, equitable, resilient, and affordable. We have to demand that California commit now to this. So take action today. You can go to our website or just contact your elected officials. No more business as usual. We have choices. If we didn't have activists, the San Francisco Bay would be completely filled in like this. Marin headlands wouldn't exist like this. Just a few people stood up and got their neighbors and their friends and others to make a movement. We can and are making a difference. Not that kind of movement. To really build and be bold, take risks, and innovate for a healthy, equitable future. This is what our future can look like if we act today. We will change what's going on in Washington. We will pass H.R. 273. Is it? Do I have the right number? Okay. 63. Here's what a headline could look like in November 2029. California, the first state to reach net zero emission, kickstarting the nation and the world. And here in 20 years from tonight, the headlines in the virtual New York Times, $420 trillion on the Healthy Planet Accords. We're on track to 350 parts per million in a safe climate. Ecosystems and communities are healthy and resilient. And guess who won the presidency? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very lovely. Now we move on. Our next speaker is Kristen Miller, Executive Director of EcoCities Builders. She leads their program development, global initiatives, and activities. Kristen leads the development of the International EcoCity Framework, is on the steering committee of EcoCity World Summit Conference Series, and is a jurist for the Katerva Awards, and the Guangzhou Award for Urban Innovation. And just a reminder, I guess we start with a video, and then she'll come up and give her talk. Okay. Get it right.
I'm Gregor Robertson, the Mayor of Vancouver. Vancouver is on the unceded homelands of the Coast Salish First Nations, and we are so excited to be hosting the EcoCity World Summit in 2019.
I'm standing on a 6-acre green roof. This is just a beautiful example of what you're going to experience when you come to Vancouver, because we're on top of the Vancouver Convention Centre. Vancouver is a great place to be hosting this conference because we demonstrate some of the fundamental values around protecting the natural environment side by side with a really dense mixed-use environment or built environment. We've got a regional district that has multiple town centres connected by rapid transit, and we're protecting and daylighting our streams. BCIT School of Construction and Environment is the academic lead for the development of the International EcoCity Standards. These standards are going to be launched at the conference.
The theme for the 2019 conference is Socially Just and Ecologically Sustainable Cities.
The concept of the ecological footprint and the carbon footprint were developed right here in Vancouver. And to bring it all back home with a major conference of this kind is a real lift for all of us.
One of the exciting parts of being involved with EcoCity Builders is the opportunity for BCIT to demonstrate the key role that education can play in helping to change how cities are built. We look forward to seeing specialists from around the world come to Vancouver so that we can learn from you.
We are very focused on world-leading innovation with clean technology, renewable energy, green buildings, and clean transportation. 2019 is an excellent time to come and visit Vancouver so you can help keep us accountable on our goal to be the world's greenest city by 2020.
And when we realize that it requires something like a 60 to 70% reduction in the energy and material consumption and throughput, that's a huge challenge. On the other hand, we have the technology and the other capacities needed to do this without massively changing our way of life and lifestyle.
When you come to our conference, you're going to experience an EcoCity in action. From the time you arrive, it's going to be a car-free city. You'll be able to get around by walking, cycling, and transit. All of our activities are going to happen in beautiful downtown Vancouver with some regional town site visits.
We look forward to welcoming you to Vancouver for EcoCity 2019.
the mic. Oh, sorry about that. Yeah. Hello? I can't see you as well, but you can hear me better because the light's right there. But so EcoCity Builders just hosted this edition of EcoCity World Summit in Vancouver. We had over 1,000 delegates. The next convening will be in Rotterdam in 2021. It started all the way back in 1990, though, in Berkeley, California. So this conference series has been going for almost 30 years. And there are some people in this room who were part of that convening. If you were, raise your hand. Yes. There's some. Yay! So today I wanted to talk about the EcoCity development model, the concept of EcoCity, and the EcoCity framework and standards that we've been working on for about 10 years now. So first of all, the EcoCity, what do we mean by that? Well, the EcoCity idea was pioneered by someone named Richard Register, who, if you know of Richard, please raise your hand. Maybe you've read his book, EcoCity Berkeley, EcoCities. But he, back in the 1970s, was influenced by architect philosopher named Paulo Soleri. And they were thinking about the relationship between the built environment and the natural environment, and very diving deep into this idea of arcology, architecture and ecology, and how they're integrated. So Soleri started building some experimental city in the Arizona desert, but Richard and others came back to Berkeley and thought about, well, how can the idea of the city in balance with nature and culture be integrated into cities that are already built? And that was sort of like the beginning of a group that he formed called Urban Ecology that later became EcoCity Builders. So the main idea of the EcoCity is a city in balance with nature and culture. Now we've gone on to think through about how that's broken down into the whole system approach. What are the different systems? What drives them? And how can we make them more healthy to ultimately create a condition that maintains a healthy climate? So it's about how we build and how we live. And how we live affects how we build. We're influenced by other thinkers like Jane Jacobs. We're also interested in not just the city, but the city and its bioregion, the flows that come from outside of the city and through the city, and particularly what drives it all, which are us. We are the people who live in the city, and we're the ones actually who are creating the demand for all of these different reasons for emissions, not just in the United States, but around the world. So a tiny bit of history. I spoke about Richard there. He really inspired me and a lot of other people because he started doing things in Berkeley. He was digging up creeks from underground where people didn't even know that they were running underground in neighborhoods. So he did some of the very early creek daylighting projects in the U.S. and sort of started a movement of bringing nature back into the city, creating green corridors, creating the Milvia Slow Street with the city of Berkeley, launching the first International EcoCity Conference, helping to create the RICO ordinance. So there's residential, environmental, conservation. And we went on to help work on the Oil Independent Action Plan for Oakland. And we've just done a lot in the Bay Area over the years. Many of you maybe remember Citizens for Strawberry Creek Plaza and the Center Street Plaza project. If you do, raise your hand. So that was sort of like a sore spot because, as you can see, it hasn't happened. Although we fought for it very hard for a long time, but you never know, right? It could always happen. But since those early days and a lot of work here around the Bay Area, we have now consolidated all of these principles into a framework, and we've taken that on the road, so to speak. So for the past, 6 to 8 years, we've been taking this idea about citizen-powered action, working with mayors, city council, businesses to transform built environments in Peru, Colombia, Argentina, Dominican Republic, Egypt, Morocco, Belgium. Many different countries are sort of really picking up on what started here in Berkeley so many years ago. So here's just the basic idea of the framework. On the left, you'll see the idea of the city as something that's almost like a living organism. Just like people and organisms, we're constantly taking in energy and materials, food, that's coming from outside the city system. So on the right, you see us putting that into a framework, and we're looking at what are the conditions for health. And all those conditions add up to health of the entire system, which also includes a healthy atmosphere. So this is really putting people right in the middle of the solution. So here are the 18 standards, and at our table you can pick up a whole brochure and you can read about each one of them. The cities that we work with, they typically are doing first an assessment to see how they stand on all 18, and then they're picking one or two and highlighting those and working on those first. So we've organized them into 4 what we call pillars. So the first one is urban design and transportation. The second one are biogeophysical conditions, water, food, energy, materials, soil, health. There's sociocultural standards that are looking at culture, education, economy, quality of life. And then finally, ecological imperatives that we all share: living within Earth's carrying capacity, living with healthy biodiversity, and keeping ecological systems healthy and linked. The neighborhood approach is something that we are a big advocate for, and the framework really works in a nested way. So really where we prefer to work is on the ground with citizens in neighborhoods, because we really see cities as a collection of neighborhoods. And each of these principles in the standards are slightly calibrated differently according to microclimates, demographics, many different factors. So we really see this is the place where we engage with both citizens, where they live, and we can look at policy and taking up scaling to a higher and more rapid transformation once we get this underway at the neighborhood level. So some of the places where we work, we're working in Nepal with a network of cities in the Kathmandu Valley. We're working in Brussels with our partner UN Environment, and they've picked several themes, but mainly it's circular economy. We've been working with them on the water piece of their circular economy plan, trying to make, this is like the linear version of right now their water system. It just goes from their aquifers and just pretty much right back, into the river or the ocean. So we're trying to help them create systems that recirculate the water at all different levels along the source to sink flow, and we're helping them understand where jobs can be created in all these different segments. Oh my gosh, I have 1 minute. Okay, in Milan, we're working with the city there to help them spread the word about what they're doing with food policy. So food waste is a big contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. And the people of Milan, food, it's very important. And they say, like, when kids come home from school, they don't say, "What did you learn?" They say, "What did you eat?" They're very involved with food systems. So they want to make sure that the food is not going straight to the landfill, it's not being wasted, but it's being captured right away and redistributed because they want to eliminate hunger in Milan as well. And there's a lot of really good work that they're sharing. In Peru, we've been helping with watershed mapping and management. You know, the Andes has a lot of water and glaciers, but those glaciers are melting. The water all runs to one side of the Andes, and the side where everyone's living is really running out. So we're helping build capacity for mapping and management of watersheds there. And then I wanted to talk a little bit, if I can just have another minute. As someone mentioned, Finland is doing a lot of really important work. Cities working hand in hand with the citizens to help them reduce their personal carbon footprint. And as Bill Reese in the video, I don't know if you picked up on this, he said that in order for us to really address the climate crisis, we have to change our lifestyles. We have to reduce our personal carbon per capita emissions by at least 70% very, very soon. So one of the enablers of being able to live a low-carbon lifestyle will be supported by cities, by helping enable us to forego the car, you know, by eating and recycling wastes in a more mindful way and low-carbon practice. So in Finland, we have an event coming in September where we're going to be testing an app that is called CityCap, and it's the first personal carbon trading app. And they're testing it right now. So we're also going to give it to everybody who's participating either in person or remotely, because you can be a virtual delegate. And then we'll be discussing and improving this app and then disseminating it to other cities. Here's the logic quickly. You're given a carbon allowance. It tracks your mobility over that week for your carbon budget. If you come in under the cap, you get credits. You can use these credits in different ways that the city is incentivizing you to exchange them for other perks that they're offering. And so this is the app that we're going to be using as well in the lead up to this event in Finland, in Lahti, where people who are coming to the conference will also be using this app. So those are a few things I wanted to share with you. Come by our table. I want to try to get you to sign up for this project we're doing in Fibershed in California, but I'm out of time. So thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. And I have to say I'm really encouraged. The speakers are working hard to stay on time, and so we'll have plenty of time for questions. So we're going to move to our final speaker before we get into a period of questions and answers. Time to start thinking about some questions you might want to bring up in discussion. For those of you in the overflow room, we are going to collect questions on cards. But right now we're going to welcome to the program Jerry Hinkle. He's the Economic Research Coordinator for Citizens Climate Lobby. He worked most of his career for 35 years as an economist in banking. He holds a master's degree in both economics and a master's in climate policy, has several publications in finance and the economics of climate policy. As a volunteer, he's lobbied Congress for 12 years to forward market-based solutions to climate change. And he served for 8 years as Citizen Climate Lobby Northern Regional Coordinator, and has been on the governing board for 4 years. And then we start with a video.
The big picture, having given this a great deal of thought and some analysis, we need a fee and dividend system.
Let's put a price on carbon and make it revenue neutral.
There are many things we can do to combat global warming. The single most important thing we can do, the real solution, is to put a price on carbon.
Because the people whose energy is producing carbon are imposing a cost on society.
You and I pay to put our trash on the sidewalk, but right now none of us pays to put carbon dioxide into the air. Nobody pays to trash our atmosphere. Why is that? Well, the big fossil fuel companies have been lobbying to keep it that way, saying that putting a price on carbon pollutants will hurt the economy. They said the same thing about acid rain back in the 1970s, when our rain was so full of pollutants from smokestacks that raindrops started to corrode steel bridges. It even hurt our eyes.
I was in Washington once, we were doing this, and somebody said, we're a bunch of nutcakes out of California. I said, yeah, we're a bunch of nutcakes. We even care about the air we breathe.
But the big fossil fuel companies said putting a price on the pollutants that caused acid rain would destroy the economy. We did it anyway. And you know what? The economy did fine. Even energy companies flourished. And we all but eliminated acid rain. We should do the same with carbon dioxide, where the stakes are even higher because carbon in the atmosphere is literally destroying the planet. So how would we do it?
A fee where everybody who made carbon dioxide put carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, if that company was forced to pay a fee into a fund, and then we'd redistribute that fee to everybody, middle-class people would come out ahead.
We'd start with a low price on carbon, say $10 for every ton we put into the air. The price would then gradually rise over time, and this would give energy companies a real reason to save money by reducing carbon pollution. It would also encourage them to spend and invest more on non-carbon energies like solar, wind, and hydropower. Now, it is true that putting a price on carbon could make our electricity bills more expensive, at least in the short term. But there's an easy solution to that. All the money collected by the polluters would go into a big fund that would then be divided up and sent to every American. So even if your electricity bill were to go up $10 a month, you'd get back at least $10, if not more.
The key, though, is the U.S. has to lead.
It's not really a tax, it's revenue neutral. It's just leveling the playing field. And I think that's beginning to get some traction. It takes a while, but it's beginning to get some traction. I think we'll get there if we keep after it.
Hi. Really, thank you for coming. Thank you for your passion for this incredibly challenging but critical issue. I'm Jerry Hinkle, and I'm going to jump right in. First thing you do is you figure out which way to... There you go. So here's what I want to... here are the points I want to make tonight. Carbon pricing is critical. Bob Reich is right. And it's essential to restoration. Yeah, but you got to work the politics, but they're moving. It's been an incredible 18 months or so. We're really making headway. CCL has been critical to that. We're certainly not alone. We got a lot of friends. But it's happened. The ball is moving. And we would love it if you would lend your voice to this cause. Third thing. So many great ideas have been presented here tonight, and I want you to know a price on carbon completely supports all of them, right? You make polluting expensive, and then solutions that reduce pollution, reduce carbon, there's a financial incentive. Right now there's a moral incentive, but try providing a financial incentive to reduce emissions. Okay. Step one for restoration. If you found yourself in a hole, job one, stop digging. We've got to reduce emissions quickly. That point was made. Wouldn't it be great, though, if we could create a policy that not only significantly reduced emissions, but stimulated global emissions? Remember, the U.S. is only 1/7 of global emissions. We're going to need a lot of help. So we need this policy to inspire and incent emission reductions from abroad. It's critical. If we brought ours to nothing, it wouldn't be close to enough, right? So this has got to work with the world. Wouldn't it be great if we didn't do this on the backs of the poor? We've really got to be good to the poor. We cannot burden the poor with this type of policy. I'm telling you, it's got to be good for the economy, because if it's got to get through the political process, what those folks care about, we have 1,500 meetings with members of Congress a year, and we hear it over and over. What about jobs? What about the economy? It's got to be good for the economy. There are policies out there now that simply mandate, hey, reduce emissions 0% by 2050, net zero emissions by 2050. But how do you get there? If you do it through a regulatory approach, it's going to cost, and somebody's going to pay for it, and that, we think, is not going to be terribly popular. So let's do this as efficiently as possible. Finally, and I'm dreaming here, pinch me or something, wouldn't it be fabulous, especially if you really want to impress the global community, other major emitters, wouldn't it be fabulous if this policy had a broad base of support? Republicans. You had some Republicans on it. Okay? I say that's critical. We believe it's critical. We say climate needs to be a bridge issue, not a wedge issue. Okay? And so I think we've got that type of policy. And what I'm talking about generally is a revenue, it's exactly what George just said, and Bob. It's a revenue-neutral carbon tax. Kirsten talked about enablers. Let's use cities as an enabler. Wow. The world has really moved towards market-based economies. What if we used the market? What if we used prices as an enabler to greatly reduce emissions? Okay? What if we made pollution more expensive by putting a fee on fossil fuels? Okay? Now, if you recall, not too long ago, we had the riots in Paris or outside of Paris, the Yellow Jackets, and no, I can't pronounce it in French. So clearly, huge public outlash. Probably not going to get away with that. These are fundamental products. Making your energy more expensive, that's going to cause a backlash. But what if, exactly as he said, you take all the funds raised and put it right back into the economy, give it right back to people? There's 3 revenue-neutral carbon tax bills before Congress now, before the House. I want to talk about 2 of them because 2 of them are very similar. And they do this in 2 ways. One of them, ours, and is pictured here. You just return all the money to households in a monthly or quarterly check. Okay, pretty straightforward. The other way to do it would be to lower some other tax, called a tax swap. So you raise the cost of pollution, you reduce, in this case, what's before Congress now is you reduce payroll taxes. Kind of cool. You make employing someone less expensive. Or if it goes to the person paying the taxes, the individual, you actually increase their wages, essentially, by reducing their Social Security taxes. So that's what we've got. Let's look at the criteria 1. Can this get it done? Can we greatly reduce emissions? The peer-reviewed analysis says yes. And this is important. I want you to remember this night, because when we go out there and push comes to shove to pass something like this, there's a well-funded opposition. And you know what they're going to scream? It's a job killer. It'll trash the economy. We shall see. So here are the 2 bills. The SWAP Act is the payroll swap. Okay. By 2030, it reduces emissions from 2017 levels by 24%. Pretty cool. That's serious. This isn't a goal. This is what peer-reviewed economic analysis from Resources for the Future says is going to happen. By 2035, they keep going down to 29%. Our bill, as I call it, CCL's bill, the one that we wrote, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, or HR 763, 37% reductions in just 10 years. That's real. This is an answer to the question, yeah, but how do you get there? It's not, if you really look closely, it's not easy. But anyway, so this is one way that you get there, putting a price on carbon. 37% by 2030, 44% by 2035. A serious dent in emissions. We may need some other complementary policies, but this is a huge first step. And let me note, in this last policy, there are environmental integrity mechanisms. Our target for ultimate emission reductions is 90% reductions in the U.S. by 2050. If we do not remain on track, the annual price increase goes from $10 to $15. So the charge for pollution goes up to make sure we stay on track. If that does not work, the policy calls for the EPA to step in with additional regulations to make sure it happens. So the target here is 90% reductions by 2050. The poor. And this is complex, and I don't have that much time, so I'm going to run through this quickly. It is only, so I've got this little, so here's the policy where you're returning money to the household. And it is the only one that is progressive. Okay? What's on this scale is the tax burden. It's when the tax burden declines that the policy is actually benefiting that group. This is the first quintile. This is the poor here, lowest income quintile. So ours, the per capita household rebate, is the only one that actually benefits the poor. And the bottom 60% do come out ahead financially. The rest, if you give it back in terms of payroll taxes, income taxes, even deficit reduction, there will be somewhat, at least, of a burden on the poor. So we like that in this policy. Okay, I love this slide. Dr. Noah Kaufman, research scholar, Columbia University. This is testimony before Energy and Commerce Committee just last month. Okay, and he shows this slide. Here's current GDP. It's a couple years old. Here's GDP in 10 years, okay, in a no-policy scenario. Okay, and here is the GDP in 10 years under a variety of revenue-neutral carbon tax scenarios. And if you just give it the eye test, is this a job killer? Is this going to trash the economy? What's the peer review? You're going to hear opinions out there, okay, about people that are very well-heeled opposition. This is in no way harms the U.S. economy, okay? In his quote to Energy and Commerce, studies suggest roughly zero impacts on the overall growth of the U.S. economy. So we get these benefits for free. What benefits? This does not include the very substantial health benefits that come from this policy, from reduced air pollution every year, valued in peer-reviewed work at over $250 billion a year. That's a freebie, okay? In addition, the climate benefits, which people are increasingly aware of, are not included here. So for free, for roughly zero impact to the economy, you get enormous health and climate benefits. That's why George and Bob call this that key first step to reducing emissions. Let's see. So, broad support for this. This is the largest economist statement in history, it's called. Came out in the Wall Street Journal 1 year ago. 3,500 plus economists, and not just nobody. All the living chair of the Federal Reserve. Alan Greenspan is behind this. Janet Yellen is behind this, and kind of everybody in between. 27 Nobel Prize winners. What are they saying we need to do? Put a price on pollution, return all the funds to the American household. So really broad support for this. Pollution cannot be free. What else do I want to say about that? Oops. So, if it's such a good idea, why hasn't it happened already? The truth is, politics is hard. People avoid specifying solutions because the moment you specify a solution, it's clear that there's winners and there's losers. And in this case, that whole emerging green economy is the big winner. Those low-carbon technologies that we know must be our futures. That's the big winner. But we got some folks that have made a lot of money with fossil fuels in the past, and they don't want to see this happen. Okay? But the ball is rolling. We have made incredible progress. This is an old slide. It's a couple months old. I don't know what we got there, 30, 40 co-sponsors. Say again? Yeah, she is. There's the home. Call me out. She's a plant. Elise is a plant. I said, Elise, tell them. Anyway, we've got 76 co-sponsors now. Okay, that's a chunk of support in the House of Representatives. Here's the plan. Here's what we hear by people that know. Yeah, Republicans are on the sideline, but when they jump in, it's going to be with this type of solution. No surprise. Doesn't grow government. Okay, doesn't. It's a free market solution. Okay, why aren't they in? Because if you're a Republican and you support a carbon tax, you get a big target on your back. So they're not going to move until they can see a path to passage. Okay, so not till we have the 46th president, probably. We hope that's sooner rather than later. But clearly, yeah, soon. But this is the way. Thank you. I will stop. I think I've got only one more slide. This has a shot. We've got one Republican. We were expecting more. It's a tough environment. But we think, we are told, that when there is a path to passage and we're not that far off, this is going to be what they get behind. Okay, it's not going to be a regulatory approach. They're not going to be up for spending a lot of money. They're going to do something, right, raising the federal deficit. They're going to do something that is free market based and is good for the economy, and it looks like this is it. Please join us. So, what's the impact on some of these other solutions? It's fabulous. You make polluting expensive. Anything that reduces carbon now has a financial incentive behind it. So, the SUV gets real expensive, right? In 10 years, you got $1 a gallon tax on gas. SUVs look like someplace you can't go. EVs look very good. Public transportation, when gas gets very expensive, it's simply going to be the right thing to do. So all of these things. Yeah, that's about all I want to say about that. I think I am done, and I can bring that. So I hope I made the point. Boy, you need it. You want a butt-kicking enabler? Use the market. Use prices. Use that something that is important to everybody, all of us, consumers, producers, innovators, every day. And that's we mind our pocketbook. And so if polluting gets expensive, now we got a financial incentive to do the right thing. We're getting there on the politics, and everything green is going to get helped by this. Thank you. That is it for me. And I will stay up here. I'm just going to.
I want to invite all the speakers to come down and have a seat. And don't go away yet, because we're going to let the audience get a chance to talk. I can see the audience, the light's right in our face here. So, yeah. So we'll have some seats. So the way we want to do this is we have two rooms. So the people in this room we have microphones, don't we, to pass around? Elise, is somebody running microphones? So who's going to run them up to yeah. And then for those of you in the overflow room, there are cards where you can write a question. And as we begin this, I want to remind people that a good question starts with a question and ends. So with that, all right, the first question.
So, is this on? Yeah. It is. So thank you very much for this panel. I've been waiting for something significant on restoration. And I just want to, since I have to ask a question, I will ask the panelists if they've thought carefully about some of the potential political traps that are in front of the restoration movement. There's a couple that I could use as examples. One is to cite the first speaker with the support for a large-scale mechanical sequestration program that is of exactly the kind which is being used as a smokescreen by the coal industry. And I could cite the last speaker who I believe is supporting or sometimes appearing to support the weakening of the regulatory backstop behind carbon pricing solutions. So my question is, are you being very careful as you introduce the restoration issue onto the agenda to be careful who you're getting in bed with?
Yes. Yeah, we've had a lot of conversations with policymakers about, what do they see as reasons that they would have trouble getting involved. And we've done our best to address those. For the most part, though, we've seen the first step as being a lot of these resolutions that I mentioned during my presentation that don't have any specific implementable actions that people could really get mad at. They're really just saying we're committed to restoring a safe and healthy climate that we know our children and grandchildren can survive. And there's not much argument with that. We figure that the next step then is to illustrate what does that look like in practice. And so as we're kind of making these incremental steps, I have to make a shout out to the County of Santa Clara. Supervisor Dave Cortese introduced a climate restoration emergency resolution. We did a press conference with him and his team last week. And that's really the first of these incremental steps of, what are the policies that are going to start moving this forward specifically? And we're going very carefully step by step. Great question.
Can I add something to that?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if you saw an article recently about African American ministers in Los Angeles influenced by a front group for oil. And of course, there's been this unbelievable increase in the number of these bots online. When I posted one thing on LinkedIn that had Greta Thunberg's name in it, within 2 hours on LinkedIn, I had probably 200 responses, and the vast majority were fake. But I had to go in and see that they were weird jumbles of where they got their degrees from. It was made up. And it was done by some computer where in Russia or who knows where it was done. And so for us, we're anticipating that as we actually challenge the status quo here in California and push, you got to remember, cap and trade, when it was passed, it was in agreement with the oil industry. And it actually allowed them to avoid most of the penalties. And in fact, carbon dioxide pollution and greenhouse gas emissions from the oil and gas sector has increased in the past few years, even though we hear celebrations of the fact that greenhouse gas emissions have gone down. And so we have a big challenge in that we have a fake news, if you will, syndicate that's operating out there that will try to undermine everything that we do. When we really start shifting the center of power and the center of where money is being spent and who gets the profit.
All right, so we're going to move on. Here's another question came from the other room, and I'm going to edit these down a bit for brevity, but it says, where are the people of color and the marginalized people, and why are they not represented on the stage?
Well, I'll answer that. We reached out to a number of different people who were representing a particular perspective, and in this case, there aren't people of color that we have on this particular panel, but we have had other panels addressing other issues, and it is something that our organization is aware of and that we need to make more efforts toward.
And we can turn to this room for another question. Oh, there we go.
Yes. A proud city of the progressive, a proud member of the progressive city of Richmond, where we just passed. Thank you. We worked very hard on it for many months, and we had a lot of opposition from the unions.
The city of Richmond passed a ban on coal shipments in the 11 Richmond shipment yard.
actually a ban on or phase out of the Lebanon coal terminal. In any event, we had a lot of opposition from the unions, and ironically enough, those of us who worked on it are very pro-union and very much concerned about just transitions, especially some organizations with the Richmond Progressive Alliance, Sunflower Alliance, and so on. And my question is, sorry, I get there. Do any of you know, everybody talks about the new Green Deal, and I've never seen a specific set of measures that will bring that about, or things that we want to do. Do we want, build windmills somewhere, blah, blah, blah. Before we can ever get something like that passed, we got to codify it, we got to spell it out. Do you know anybody working in this area?
I think the question is clear. It's about what is the Green New Deal and what are we seeing? I mean, maybe Jerry.
So initially, the Green New Deal is a set of objectives without specification as to how they will get there. They had said that they would come forward with a way to get there. That's really where the rubber meets the road. What we've had since then is 2 Democrat-only proposals in the House, legislation that's been introduced by ENC recently. And so they backed off the target dramatically, and they're saying net zero emissions in the U.S. by 2050. And they still are very light on exactly how to get there. They're basically mandating it through regulations. It's political posturing. So what I see is it is really challenging when you go from a lofty ideal, and they're fabulous, and we agree with them, to where the rubber meets the road. How do you actually get there? So they're not there yet with that. Here's what's coming. The Select Committee on the Climate Crisis in the House of Representatives is committed to coming out with legislation, or at least a framework for legislation, in March. That may be as close to what you're looking for as we're going to get.
Okay, thank you.
And in California, Assemblyman Bonta has just launched something just a couple weeks ago with a very diverse coalition of organizations and communities from across the state that specifically talks about carbon neutrality by 2030.
So we have a question over here.
A shift to a little, so I'm going to read a question from the other room. This is from a 6th grade science teacher. Do you all have suggestions on what a K through 8th grade teacher can do to help guide and support our next generation of climate activists?
I do, but you go first. So we've had some conversation already about, what's the difference between talking about when the rubber meets the road, what is this going to look like, and calling for a commitment and working from there. So I think it's important for young people to realize that they have the ability and, in fact, the responsibility to call upon the people who are currently making the decisions to formally, explicitly commit to restoring the climate. Because once someone has committed to it, then you can say, hey, you're doing this thing that is counter to this commitment that you've told me you have. So I see that education and, letting young people know about this opportunity as a great thing that educators can do.
Thanks. I think it's important that this start at a very young age, and education as a form of appreciation for the natural world, for our planet, for living systems. And that's something that children just, automatically gravitate towards. So fostering that from a very young age is something that countries like Finland, for example, and others have a lot of success at ingraining this sense of connection to life, appreciation, a deep appreciation for living things, and then wanting and caring about it and wanting to protect it and wanting to have behaviors and actions that protect and restore and respect living systems. So I think ingraining that into the curriculum at the earliest stage possible is really the best thing that we can do.
I'll just add one more thing to it. I agree very much with my colleagues here that I think it's really important to instill the values of refuse, reuse, and reduce. because our society keeps pushing to buy more, buy more, buy more. The Nordic countries that are a great example in some ways are as big of consumers as we are here in California. And our consumption-based emissions, meaning the out-of-boundary emissions, are not counted in what we show for the state or each county or each city. And so we have a huge effort to teach young people it's not about getting more. It's about living quality of life, in touch with nature, and not having to keep buying things that get produced in other parts of the world and destroy other people's lives.
Okay.
Tom, we have a question over here.
We have a question up here.
Hi, my name is Evan Hines. I run an organization called Climate Careers. We exist to help people find jobs that are climate impactful. My question is, looking beyond just K through 8, I'd love to hear about looking at this room, there's not a ton of folks here who might be in high school or college. And it seems that I was at a Sunrise event earlier this weekend, and then I was also at a Citizens Climate Lobby event. And there's a major generational divide around in the climate or environmental movement. And it's frustrating because you have young people on one hand that are saying, we need resources. And then you have, on the other hand, older folks talking about, well, how can we reach the youth? So I'd love to hear from you folks, with all the amazing initiatives you're working on, what are the concrete plans that your organizations have to engage a younger generation? And not K through 8, like high school above.
That's a great question. Very briefly, what we EcoCity Builders have done, we've designed a university-level course curriculum, and it's called Urban Insight. And wherever we work, which for the past years has been outside of the U.S., but definitely it's in English and Spanish language, and it can be implemented here. It brings young people into the middle of the process of partnering with neighborhoods and communities and cities to look at the challenges and opportunities where the job and innovation gaps are and where solutions can be implemented. So it really trains them and involves them from the very beginning in this whole process of how do we deal with it and what do we do about it.
I'd like to answer that question. I just came from the Wild and Scenic Film Festival up in Nevada City, and the folks at Circle have just produced a whole program to go into K through 12. And we're looking at the Citizens Climate Lobby, and the money that we raise through these events that we do here, using part of that to go into the schools and bring these incredibly engaging films on a variety of environmental topics to kids in a way that they can get enthused and understand it. So that's one of the things that we're looking at.
Okay. I think we have time for a few more, right? We want to go till 8:30? We have to wrap it up. Okay. So we're going to wrap it up with one final question that I would like everybody briefly to touch on, which is are you optimistic, given all of the things you know and you've heard here in other places, are you optimistic about the future of the climate or even the future of human civilization? This is the Happy Gene question.
I'll start since I'm on one side of the panel. I also have a bit of a happy gene. For 8,000 years, we were at 57 degrees global average temperature, roughly, right? Very little variation. It's been an amazing 8,000 years. Humanity has developed beautifully over that time. From 57, we've gone to 59 now. And in a few decades, in my lifetime, we're going to 61. And there's not a whole lot that we can do about that. Am I optimistic? Absolutely. Are we going to avoid the worst effects of climate change? No. But our passionate work will have things be a lot better than it would have been for my two daughters. And there's nothing more important to me. And the snowball is rolling at a very, rapid clip at this point. And some of you saw the news. The number one topic in Davos, Switzerland, if I pronounced that right, is climate risk. Businesses are taking it real seriously, I think there is a critical mass of consciousness at this point to do something. I think we do have the solutions, and, we're behind where we wanted to be, but it is happening. And if this topic is in any way disconcerting to you, I ask you to turn that emotion into activism and let them know, you're right, we deserve a stable climate for our kids. Demand it.
Okay, move on. You want to say something? Or
the house is on fire, and it's like most of us, not us in this room, but most people are, let's say the 2 rooms in the back are burning, and you're sitting in the living room watching TV. That's what's happening right now. And so we really need to act like what's really happening, which is it is on fire. We need to put it out, and then we need to restore it. So that means that all of us have to act on it. We need to talk to everybody about it. And more than anything, we got to spend our days making a difference. For us at the Climate Center, that means focused on government and what government can do. There are a whole bunch of solutions here that all have to happen. But without government intervention at multiple levels, none of this will be successful. So talk to your elected officials at every level. Run for office yourselves. Let's make a difference in the next few years especially. We'll always be able to make a difference, but we can make a much, much bigger difference if we act now. Thank you.
I'm going to join the chorus of, yes, I am optimistic. In part because this is not the only room full of people that cares about this issue. This is not the only panel that is working on this. Over the last 2 years, I've seen more and more people come up with really amazing solutions for things that we can do with carbon dioxide. And more people figuring out how to pull it out of the atmosphere in more effective, more cost-effective ways. So the momentum is growing incredibly. And I'm seeing more people who are feeling hopeful and optimistic enough to actually join in the efforts. So I think it's important that we keep the spirits up in a realistic way. The house is on fire. And we have a really cool opportunity to turn this around together.
I waver. I feel that the human species is obviously incredibly successful. Like, we've got billions of us all over this planet. And we are now, we've entered the Anthropocene. So now our actions collectively are changing all of Earth's systems. This is a huge thing. But I feel like we also are a species that wants to survive, and we have very big brains. So, I'm not sure. Some days I'm pessimistic, some days I'm optimistic. I think it could go either way. I think we do have all of the tools and solutions, but we also have to change. We all have to change our lifestyles. We have to reduce our emissions and the way we build and live. So are we really willing to do that in our lifetimes? Because if we don't do it in our lifetimes, then the future generations aren't going to have that opportunity. So it is a tipping point.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Well, we've reached the end of the program, and
hold on, don't leave yet. We have just a couple of quick announcements.
But I do want to thank all of the panel members. It's been very interesting, and they've done a good job of presenting the information and answering questions. I want to thank the audience for coming. These things don't work very well if we don't have people in the audience. Let's talk to ourselves. And you've been a very attentive audience, and we've gotten some very good questions. And we're going to be making an effort to have more events like this. So I hope you'd be interested in returning.